Alright, folks, we will continue our reading, or not reading, but understanding the book, The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. The first thing Taleb quietly, destroys is your love for averages. You know how everything, in life, explained with averages: average salary, average life expectancy, average growth, average risk. The work that works fine in Mediocristan, how we call, Taleb's word for places where things don't vary much. Like human height, no one is 10 meters tall. If you meet 100 people, the tallest would be 1,000 times taller than the shortest. But modern life is not Mediocristan, so called. It's Extremistan, and Extremistan is one person can have more money than millions of others combined. Like your typical billionaires who got the amount of money which average even country don't have. One app can have more users than entire countries. One video can get more views than all your content put together. Even in terms of an artist, you can say that any artist become famous just based on very few amounts of, or even maybe just one song. And here's the trap: when you use averages in this kind of extremist on how Nassim calling it, you get nonsense. If, for example, Jeff Bezos walks into a cafe, the average wealth of people in that cafe instantly becomes billionaires. And that does not mean everyone got rich. It means one extreme crushed the statistics. So when you hear the average startup makes X, or the average investor returns Y, your brain thinks that describes reality, but it doesn't. It describes a mathematical lie created by a few, monsters in the tail. Real lesson: stop planning for the average, plan for the tail, because the tail is where all the money, disasters, and fame live. Second thing, a tip from this book, Black Swan, that Taleb shows you why history looks predictable after it happens and insane before. After 2008, everyone had a story about why the crash was inevitable. After, for example, COVID, everyone had a story about why it was obvious. After tech bombs, wars, revolutions, suddenly the causes feel clean and neat, so-called hindsight fortune tellers. That's the narrative fallacy. Your brain stitches chaos into a movie script. Your brain stitches chaos into a movie script after the fact, and not because it's true, because it's comforting. But before the event, those stories did not exist. There were a million possible futures, and we pretend only the one that happened was logical. And Taleb's point is brutal. History is not predictable, it's explainable. And people confuse those two they're, the same thing. So when someone tells you, for example, of course it happened because of X, the real answer is you're just good at telling stories after the explosion. Yeah, because it's like a no-brainer to say that, like, yeah, it was obvious, that kind of shit. But the real, like, smartness, you can call it, in order to predict something before it's actually happening. That's why prediction is so dangerous. It gives you, in terms of, like, when you're doing that in hindsight, it gives you the illusion of control in a world that doesn't care. Third tip from this, like a Black Swan book, we can take that you don't need to be right. You need to not be fragile. In other words, you gotta be more resilient for any like a life test, you can call it. This is one of, like, a Taleb's sneakiest ideas, because most people optimize for being correct, smart, respected, having, like, a good reasons. And Taleb says that's cute and deadly, because in Black Swan world, being right most of the time doesn't matter. Being not wiped out matters. Yeah, being resilient matter. Being, like, having ability to survive most, like, a life test. And you don't need to predict the hurricane. You need a house that doesn't collapse when it comes. Yeah, that's the good point, that you don't have to be like a magician, a fortune teller. You gotta create your environment, your, like, life quality, which can, like, survive this kind of shit. This is why, Taleb loves things that have, limited downside and unlimited upside, and hates things that have, like, a smooth, like, little gains and hidden, like, catastrophic losses. For example, banks before 2008 were so-called making money every month. Then one bad month erased the decades, and that's the fragility. In other words, just because something was, like, in a good shape and stable for a long time, it doesn't mean that it's tomorrow going to be the same. It looks stable right up until it isn't. So the real game is not like a forecasting. It is building a system that survives what you didn't forecast, which is, again, another good point. It's not about predicting what will happen, but it's more about, like, creating that kind of systems which can survive many shit. Another, like, a fourth tip we can take from these experts, like, usually the most dangerous people in the Black Swan world, but not because, they're stupid, but because they're confident. And Taleb goes after, like, economists, analysts, forecasters, and talking heads for one reason. They give precise answers in an imprecise world. The more complex the system, the more, unpredictable it is. Yet that's where like, experts speak with the most certainty. Why? Because they are rewarded for it. Nobody, invites someone on TV to say, I don't know. They want someone who says, like, here's what will happen next quarter. So the system selects like a confident storytellers, not accurate ones, which is, again, there's another nuances, like every news get its own, let's call it, like a brainwashing purpose, and that's why they hiring and inviting people who confirming these kind of beliefs. So yeah, definitely it's not about being and giving like a smart, precise future predictions, but it's more about being like confident and even sometimes saying some stupid shit but with a confident face, So Talem's point is nasty. The more someone, claims to predict the future, the more like a skeptical you should be, especially like in this kind of like finance, politics, and tech. Another fifth point from the book The Black Swan, that the most success is luck wearing a nice suit. Again, most success is luck wearing a nice suit. This one hurts. And Talem's not saying that, skill doesn't matter. He's saying luck matters way more than we're comfortable admitting. In so-called extremist, and how he's calling it, outcomes dominated by rare events, and you don't get rich slowly. You get rich because one thing explodes. The best-selling author is not like a 10% better than average writer. They're 10,000% luckier with timing, distribution, trends, and attention. Yeah, it's, in other words, of course, it is, I guess, of their objective truth that like best-selling author could be better than average one, but author just want to mention that we gotta consider other circumstances which made, like, for example, this author the best, and it's not necessarily his own. It's not just his skills. It's like how he calling it, like a timing. Also, his it could be just his friend who like working at the same niche and who helped him. Who knows? In other words, like a kind of corruption shit, we can call it. So yeah, we gotta, in other words, definitely consider luck. And his point is that sometimes people confuse luck with their own skills. In other words, they start to overestimate their own skills, but actually it just was luck. And because humans hate randomness, we invent stories about genius, grit, and vision after the fact. And Talem's, uncomfortable truth that we worship their survivors and ignore like the graveyard of like equally skilled people who didn't get the lucky break. So if you're winning, do not get arrogant. If you're losing, don't get ashamed. You're swimming in a storm, not a swimming pool. In other words, just be consistent with whatever you're doing, and just because you didn't win yesterday, it doesn't mean that you're not gonna win today. You gotta keep going and consider to get better constantly. Okay, another tip from this great book, The Black Swan, that the most dangerous like risks are the ones you cannot measure. For example, people feel safe when something has a number, 5% chance, for example, or like once in 100 years, low probability. And Taleb calls this nonsense. We don't know the true probabilities of like extreme events. We estimate them using past data, and the past has very few extreme events in it. So we massively underestimate how bad the worst case can be. It is like measuring how like a big earthquake can be like by looking at the last 10 years. And that's why like disasters always seem bigger than expected. They were not bigger, your model was blind. In other words, just some, if like some, the reason why this shit happened, that's not surprise. Your prediction was wrong. And again, if like something were like previously stable, good for the long time, it doesn't mean that's gonna be the same way forever, you know. You gotta be always prepared for the plan B and C for the worst case scenario. Alright, the tip number 7, you learn more from what didn't happen than from what did. And again, let me repeat it. You learn more from what didn't happen than from what did. And Taleb calls this the silent evidence problem, because we only see the winners. We don't see, the business that failed, the ideas that died, the books that didn't sell, the strategies that blew up. So we study success and think we're learning, but we're only seeing survivors. It is like, trying to learn about war by interviewing all the soldiers who came back. The biggest information is in what disappeared, and it's invisible. So every success story is incomplete by definition. In other words, we gotta consider like a hidden information. But by saying hidden, like I'm telling about that, we gotta focus also, like learn from our mistakes, not just from our wins. Another tip number 8 about modern life, that modern life creates more black swans, not fewer. People think, technology makes the world like safer and more predictable, but Taleb says it does the opposite. That everything, is connected, everything is leveraged, and everything depends on everything else. So small failures spread into massive disasters. For example, a server goes down, a platform crashes, then it goes to the business, lose revenue, markets panic. And in the old world, a village burned, but in the modern world, the whole system shakes. And that's why, we get more extreme outcomes now, not fewer, because it's more connected with each other, and it's more, related to the online. Alright, the tip number 9 about that, if something can happen, it eventually will. This is not pessimism, it's mathematics. When you run enough trials, rare events become inevitable. A plane crash is rare, millions of flights later it happens. A financial crash is rare, decades later it happens. So stability is an illusion created by short memory. And Taleb's rule, if you expose, to ruin, time will eventually find you. So design your life so ruin isn't on the menu. In other words, instead of like approaching some worst case scenario emotionally and panicking, you gotta logically prepare the system which can survive the worst case scenario. And the last tip number 10 gonna be about that the future will not be smoother version of today. This is the like a deepest black swan idea. Like we imagine the like a future as like more apps, more growth, more tech. But the real future will be more weird, more shocks, more things nobody predicted. Because the biggest changes come from things we cannot imagine yet. In other words, we can rephrase it in a way that just because we cannot see something that will happen, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't happen, it will not happen. Because the biggest changes come from things we cannot imagine yet. If we could imagine them, they would already exist. So the only rational posture is humility. Not like, I know what will happen, but I don't know, so I prepare for what I can see. So you gotta constantly, learn new things, be adaptable like a chameleon. And that's the real, message of the black swan. Not fear, not randomness, but this. Stop trying to be, smart about the future. Start trying to not be stupid about uncertainty. And honestly, that's one shift changes everything. Thank you for listening, and if smash the like button, subscribe button. See you next time.